Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Doar, the president of AEI, and I'm very pleased to have you all with us this afternoon for a book discussion with Brian Hooks, the chairman and CEO of Stand Together and the co-author with Charles Koch of Believe in People, Bottom-Up Solutions for a Top-Down World. It's a great book. It's an inspiring book. It's a book that makes you feel good about America and about the future of our country and about what can be done to help people move up. And I'm just very pleased to have Brian with us this afternoon. Before I introduce Brian or get the discussion started, I want to say we really look forward to questions from all of you. And there is an email address for you to email questions to us that we will receive. And about halfway through, we'll turn to those and keep the discussion being going forward and being informed by your questions. So Brian, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Robert. I'm looking forward to this.
It's a real pleasure to have you. You know, as I've been in Washington these last 7 years, I'm relatively new to Washington. Getting to know you and your organization has been one of the great pleasures. You also are an alumni of the Mercatus Center, which is, an organization that keeps us busy over here at AI because we can't let them catch up. You know, they're just so good and so effective at what they do, and we admire that work. And you built a great organization there, Brian, and I know you're doing the same at Stand Together.
Well, thank you, Robert. It's been fun to see you take the reins at AEI and already begin to accomplish so much. So really appreciate the chance to get back together on this platform.
Okay, so I told you before the show that I stayed up late last night and I read as closely as I can this book, and I was looking for the toughest questions I could give you to really give you some zingers, but it's hard because it's such a lovely book and it inspired positive feelings. And here in Washington, it's good to have those positive feelings, and it often happens when you start turning your attention to places outside of Washington and the rest of America where a lot of good things are happening. But before we get into the substance of the book, I do want to just take a moment, both of us, especially you, to recognize Charles. He is your co-author. He has done so much for the country and for his company and for the people that work for him, and in so many ways. And a big part of the book is a description of his background and his history and his achievements and what he learned and how he got there. And I just wondered if you'd, as a start us off, give us a little, not everyone knows that story of Charles Koch and how did he achieve what he has achieved and what are his core beliefs?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to start off that way because, I tell people I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world. I get to work every day for and alongside Charles, and that means you learn something new every day. And I met Charles 20 years ago, and it's been an incredible education and incredible experience to be able to work closely with him. And what we try to do in this book is share some of what Charles has learned, both through his own hard work and experience, but also from the thousands of people that he's encountered through his business work and through the work in society now with Stand Together. People probably know the high points of Charles's resume, right? He's the chairman and CEO of Koch Industries, a role that he's played there since the 60s. We talk about in the book the progress and the success that he's had in business. But what people probably don't know is that when Charles introduces himself and he describes his role, whether at the company or in his philanthropy at Stand Together, he talks about himself as the philosopher in chief. And that really is an apt description, and if not a holistic and complete one. And that's what we talk about in this book, is that the book really is the opportunity to share the principles of human progress, those principles that have really inspired Charles, and as he would say, the principles that as he's applied in his personal life, in his business life, and in his work to help improve society broadly through social change, these are the principles that have helped him to be more successful than he ever dreamed possible. And so the book really is a chance for us to share some of those lessons about how everyone can apply those principles to help not only succeed in their lives, but also to make a greater contribution in society.
And for you, there's a reference in the book to the term true north. I think you and Charles write about a sense of knowing where you're going, what you're aspiring to do. And so you've now come to Stand Together. How did you come to be involved with Stand Together and with the Koch enterprises? How did that happen?
Well, as I say, I consider myself to be one of the luckiest people in the world. I was born in Michigan, raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, went to University of Michigan, and somehow, I still don't know to this day, was connected with the Institute for Humane Studies, a great organization that I'm sure a lot of people viewing this will be familiar with. And IHS puts on summer seminars for college students, and I was one of those college students. Little did I know, Charles Koch was the chairman of IHS at the time, and went to work immediately after that for the Mercatus Center, where Charles is the founder and was a board member at the time. And I was 2 weeks in to the job, had no idea what I was doing at this organization in Washington, D.C., and looked up from the men's room sink at our board meeting, and there was Charles Koch. And so, as luck would have it, I met him 2 weeks into the job, sat across the board table from him for 14 years at the Mercatus Center, the last 10 of which where I was the executive director. And then one day after that, after one of our board meetings, he asked me and ultimately asked me to do this job. So it's been an incredible experience to be part of this movement for a free and open society, and to to be able to support so many of the organizations now in this role that are working towards that true north, as you say, that North Star that we describe, a society of mutual benefit where people succeed by helping others, by realizing their potential in a way that's mutually beneficial.
Did you feel when you made this shift from a sort of a economics-focused think tank focusing on big ideas and statistics and charts and graphs and numbers and other things too, I know.
There are a lot of charts.
To Stand Together, that you were turning away from the federal government, turning away from Washington, and moving back toward the country?
No, I didn't look at it that way. I wouldn't say turning away. I would say sort of expanding the view. And so, as we talk about in the book, we're searching for the most effective ways that we can all contribute in a society such that we empower everyone to live better lives. And while federal policy plays a critical role in that, and so you can't turn away from it, you've got to continue to work to improve it. If that's the only place we focus, we're going to miss the opportunity to do everything else that's important in people's lives. And so, at Stand Together, what we do is we focus on public policy in a very significant way, but we do it in combination with a focus on helping to improve communities, helping to improve education, which happens to be our largest focus, and then also recognizing the important role that business plays. And we think we refer to those as the key institutions in society, and those sort of four pillars. And when they're all firing on all cylinders, everybody's better off. But if any of them are sort of out of sync or playing an inappropriate role, overstepping their role, that's where we see the challenges. So federal policy still plays a really important role. I know I still get up every day and I care about what's happening in DC, but I think we've widened the aperture, so to speak.
So let's talk about where examples of this sort of effort at the bottom or in local communities, or that you think are exemplary of the kind of behavior that changes a community, improves the lives of individuals, makes people feel as if they are achieving that true north. Give me some examples that are in the book that you like best, or that if you talk about, you like to mention them as exemplary of this sort of activity.
Well, sure. So the book puts forward kind of three big ideas, and we go through a lot of examples to illustrate these ideas. The first is that the problems in our country are many, and so the solutions are going to have to be varied and many, but they'll all have at their core this commitment to the idea that everybody has a gift. And as a society, as we help people to realize their gift and express it in ways that help others to improve their lives, then we all are better off. We summarize that as all these solutions will have a deep belief in people at their core. Second big idea is that the solutions that empower people from the bottom up tend to work better than those that come from the top down, kind of one size fits all approach. And then the third idea is that when we unite with anyone to do right, when we sort of expand the scope of our partnerships, we can be more effective than we can be on our own. To give you an example of one of my favorite stories from the book that demonstrates this, it's a guy named Scott Strode who leads a group called the Phoenix. And the Phoenix is a remarkable organization. It's a peer-to-peer physical fitness organization that helps those who are struggling with addiction to not just overcome addiction, but to find a positive path forward. And what's remarkable about this organization is that it is wildly effective relative to sort of what we've come to expect from the standard clinical approach, even good programs. It has about twice the effectiveness rate in terms of helping people to stay off of drugs and alcohol if they participate. But what's also remarkable is kind of the secret to its success. And that is that it is an example of a program that invests in those that are closest to the problem. So Scott Strode, the leader of this organization, is a former addict himself, struggled with addiction for about 10 years. And it's through that personal knowledge that Scott has about what it means to struggle, but also what's important about recovery, that he's built this program. And the program is premised on this idea that when we believe in people, when we look at people who have struggled not as problems to be solved, but as people who can participate in their own solution, then we can be successful not just at addressing the problem that they're struggling with at the time, but in empowering them to really realize their potential in a way that helps to contribute to society overall. And so what Scott does is he recruits others who have been in similar situations to start their own chapters of the Phoenix. And when we met him, he was in about 7 cities, to give you a sense of his drive and his potential. Mm-hmm. He's now in 50 different communities. And we've just signed up with him to help him to expand, to create 2,500 chapters all across the country. If he does that, he thinks he can reach about 1 million people over the next 5 years, which would make him one of the largest addiction recovery programs in the country. And you say, well, why addiction? You know, and you look at the extent of that in our country right now. You know, it's tens of millions of people who have struggled or are struggling. I think the last statistic I saw is that over half the people in this country have someone close to them that has wrestled with that. And the numbers, unfortunately, are only going up.
Well, and Brian, I come from the social services world, as you know, working in welfare to work programs in my career. And it's underappreciated the extent to which substance abuse is the source of a lot of difficulties. It's both a symptom, but it's also a cause of preventing people from being able to move up economically and care for their families. And often it's under addressed because people want to blame something else. They want it to be something else or than that, because that's too simple or too easy or too common. And I'm reminded, I just did just a little digression, you know, in our world, you and I, we both follow the various people that write about America, write about the country, and write about problems we face and how we could make them better and tell good stories. And of course, J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy has done that, both in the book and now in the movie. And the more you read that and study that, the more you realize that that story is more than anything else about addiction in his mother. I mean, there are lots of other factors going on, but the economic difficulties, the societal difficulties, the tensions with regard to the business community are all sort of there and play a role. But there's nothing more debilitating to a family than a family member who is strung out. And so I'm really glad that that's the example you chose, because often addiction is the source of the biggest problem holding families back. So I'm glad to hear that you do that. And I wanted to ask, after that little digression about another player in this world, what you and Charles's view is of the extent to which these organizations are many, a few, are these humble few lights showing in the darkness of a dark America, or what's your view about, because I hear at AEI and also in Washington, if you read the rhetoric of some of our greatest thinkers, conservatives or liberals, they like to paint a broken America. And I'm just wondering, where does Charles Koch and Brian Hooks come down on that?
Well, we want to be very wide-eyed and realistic about the challenges that are facing the country, and they are absolutely real challenges. I talked earlier about how we understand the world in terms of these 4 key institutions, and we could go through each one, but I think in each case there are fundamental failures that are creating real hardship for people. And you talked about J.D. Vance. I'll talk about one of your folks, Tim Carney, who wrote a very good book on a similar topic, Alienated America, and the idea that this the consequence of the failure of our key institutions is not equally distributed throughout our country. And so there are communities that are doing very, very well. And that often gets overlooked, as you say, in sort of the doom and gloom. We can't overlook that, right?
Yeah.
We have a whole lot of examples of progress where things are working well. We need to learn from that. We need to extend that. But we also can't overlook the fact that a lot of people are struggling. And we look at the divisions in our country. We look at some of the challenges that surface. And I see those as the reflection of deeper problems. So you think about an education system where only about 30% of students graduate high school ready for college. And then when you really dig into that data and you look at how that's not equally distributed, some groups are really suffering more than others. Or you look at what Angus Deaton calls deaths of despair. We talked about addiction, alcoholism, suicide. These are reflections of real struggles in our communities. But we would be wrong to conclude from that all is lost.
Yeah.
And so you ask, are these just a handful of bright spots? I don't think so at all. What we find is that the solutions to our problems, or to our country's problems, are all around us. It's just that the dominant paradigm, this top-down approach that we tend to employ as a society, means that we are looking in the wrong places. We just don't see them. But when we start to look at those who are closest to these problems as solutions, we start to see all of these wonderful, what we call in the book, social entrepreneurs. And some are operating at small scale, some are operating at pretty significant scale. But what they all have in common is that they see the opportunity to help people overcome the barriers that are holding them back, when most other people only can see those barriers. They can only see those problems. And that's ultimately what makes them entrepreneurs.
So there you're getting a little close to sort of, and maybe I don't want to in any way mischaracterize this, but sort of tipping your hand on the politics of this a teeny bit. And that is that, would it be fair to say that this emphasis on bottom up or local is in some ways, without being overtly partisan or political, a rejection of those who think that all things come from the federal government and all, we all are sort of wards of the state. And my way of looking at that's more likely to be the left of center in American politics, but maybe I'm wrong. Well, so what's your take on that? Are you making a kind of subtle political statement about decentralization and federalism properly understood, and a smaller federal government and a more robust local community?
Well, if it's subtle, we haven't done our job.
Okay, there you go.
We don't mean to mince words at all.
There you go.
There's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, but I don't think it's political and I don't think it's partisan.
Okay.
So I think the way that I think about it is the future of our country is going to have a lot less to do with the current divide between left and right. It's going to have a whole lot more to do with whether or not we are believing in people and empowering people from the bottom up, or frankly, as a society, if we're going to just give up on a whole lot of people. And of course, nobody says they're going to give up on people, but when you look at the systems that our society is administering right now, these top-down systems, that's what they do. Again, whether it's education, I think the business community has a lot to do to really embrace this notion of empowering people, starting with their employees, the way that we're handling our communities. And then, government policy right now, it's not empowering people. And so there's nothing subtle about that. We need a paradigm shift in the way that we understand the potential of all people to contribute. And then we need our systems across the board to reflect that paradigm.
So just to take that another step further, it's not partisan and not subtle, but it's an indictment of pox on both houses. that both R's and D's are equally guilty of sort of being the parties of the state or the federal government, or am I trying to, what do you think of that?
Well, I don't disagree with you. I think when it comes to the institution of government, call it socialism, call it nationalism, call it protectionism, call it cronyism. These are all manifestations of a way of understanding the world that does not believe in people. It's not empowering people from the bottom up. But again, it's not just limited to government.
Yeah.
So you look at the way that most businesses are organized these days, whether they're engaged in corporate welfare and cronyism, looking to benefit through their political connections rather than creating value in society, or the way that they're organized to treat their employees. Gallup does a poll, you're probably familiar with this, and every couple of years they put it out. The numbers vary, but they all hover around about 60 to 70% of employees. That's most of us. Most of us are employees.
Mm-hmm.
Say that they don't find fulfillment in their jobs, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's a consequence of businesses not truly embracing this bottom-up approach, really trying to empower their employees to find the best ways to add value within their business. So we need this paradigm shift across our society.
Well, I was going to come to business next, and so I'm glad that you brought it up. And so, and this is where I my sort of free market priors sort of come into play, and I know you have free market priors as well. But when I hear you and Charles talk about empowering people in businesses, and business employees aren't happy, and I wonder, are you talking about greater regulation of business so that they fulfill some goal with regard to their employees that you think is more important than delivering a good product at a fair price to their customers and a fair return to their shareholders?
No, absolutely not. What we're talking about is that the best way to do that, the best way to create value for customers and for shareholders, is to help your employees tap into their skills so that they can add even more value within your business. So businesses that miss the chance to do that are missing the chance to create even more value for society, and ultimately to capture a greater value for their shareholders and for themselves.
Right.
So we talk about in the book this sort of, and you kind of lead me down this path.
Yes. Yeah.
People see challenges that are created by this top-down approach. In this case, businesses sort of treating their employees as kind of plug and play, one size fits all. And they say, geez, that outcome's not what we want. So let's double down on that top-down approach. Let's do even more, like through regulation or what have you. And then we're surprised that we get more of the same, that we make the problem worse. So no, the top-down approach, the remedy for that is to empower people from the bottom up. It's embracing the principles of a free and open society.
So sticking with the emphasis on the positive, and then I want to come to the negative in a minute. What is an example of a business that's in the book and that you describe that brings these values into play in a way that you would celebrate or let us all know about?
Well, I think there's a lot of them that do it well. I'll talk about the one that I know best, which is Koch Industries, and we talk about that in the book. And really, what we describe in the book is the attempt to apply these ideas of human progress that have been responsible for progress throughout society. We talk about how to apply those in a business context. And so, Charles goes through in his telling of his experience at Koch Industries, of having to kind of challenge the protectionism that had crept into the company back in the 60s. And it was really through applying these principles of openness and competition and recognizing, Schumpeter's description of the world of business, right? That the earth is always crumbling underneath the businessman's feet, this notion of creative destruction, really embracing that rather than trying to resist it, that Koch has been able to be as successful as it has. But let me get really specific with you. One way that's implemented, and certainly we try to do this with our employees here at Stand Together as well. The notion that rather than identifying a role in a company or in a business and then trying to go out and find the person that'll fit into that role, we start with the person and we say, does this person have a contribution mindset? Are they motivated to find ways to contribute to the business? And do they have a talent, a skill that can be expressed in a way that creates value for us? And if they do, we want them on our team. And then what we do is we say, now let's build on those gifts. Let's design a role around the individual that's going to let him or her to express their unique talents to the fullest. Because if we do that, it's not charity, it's not going against the interest of the business. It's the best way that the business is going to find value from that employee. And if you do that at scale, you ought to expect that you can do better than if you're, consistently fitting a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, that the Koch Industries and companies you described treat individuals in that way, and I believe that from people I talk to that kind of behavior does lead to better outcomes and better shareholder value and more satisfied customers and a growing company. But what I trust that completely, and it's described in the book, and it's quite compelling. But what I wanted to know was, what's the statistic? Is there a statistic success besides shareholder value or growth or customer satisfaction? You mentioned before that 70% of Americans are not fulfilled in their jobs. Polls are tricky, and how the question is asked and someone's mood. Work is a really key ingredient in people's lives, and often it gives them order and discipline, and it involves them in a community. So even when they're saying this job doesn't really completely fulfill me, doesn't necessarily mean they're saying work is a bad thing or I don't want to work here. But is that how Koch Industry evaluates its success in terms of treating employees? Is satisfaction among employees?
Well, I think those first few measures that you mentioned are pretty important.
Yeah.
Right? Growth and shareholder value.
That's right. Those are the ones but those tend to be reflective of a positive work environment.
That's right, and I think that's the point. And certainly you want to understand at an individual level and get feedback from your employees. But the case that we make in the book is that here again, this is not an alternative way to do business that involves self-sacrifice. This is, as Maslow describes, and we go into the book, synergy, right? The confluence of the selfish and the selfless, where you're finding benefit for yourself by empowering others. And that we see that play out again in the business world, and we're encouraging more businesses to do it.
And I think sometimes that what I admire about this is that you all are celebrating businesses that are in under-regulated or not very heavily regulated industries, where they are able to compete on a fair basis, and the winner isn't the one who gets the best secret deal from the government or the best subsidy. And there are a lot of them in America. I mean, there are companies that are really sort of built their strength on just let us compete and we'll do well. I mean, I'm thinking of Walmart or Starbucks or a lot of these big retail companies. I mean, you have to acknowledge that they've had, what government intervention is protecting them from competition? I don't know that there are many, but are there, or am I missing it here?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think that there are varying degrees of this sort of cronyism, corporate welfare in different industries. But I think, look, as I see the evidence, as I understand sort of history, while it may seem like it's in the short-term interest of a business to seek favors from government, right?
Yeah.
To seek corporate welfare, to make money without having to create value for your customers, in the long term, it's a recipe for decline or disaster at a business. And that's for two reasons, right? One, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense long term that if you inflate the price of your product, you make your customers poorer for having to interact with you because you rig the system with government policy, that you're going to have customers for very long. But the second reason is when you take your eye off the prize being creating value for your various different constituencies, your customers, your employees, your communities, that may work for a little while. But all you're doing ultimately, I think, is putting off the fall and making the fall much larger.
Yeah.
And, you see that in you know more about this than I do, but in industries like the auto industry. I was born in Detroit. They were able to put off competitive pressures for a while, and that meant their performance from a quarterly earnings perspective, look pretty good. But ultimately, that game doesn't last forever, and the fall that not only those companies experience, but the communities within which they operate experience because of that cronyism corporate welfare was disastrous. And so it's not in the business interest long term to kind of play these games with cronyism, with corporate welfare, with government favoritism.
The book is got a lot on corporate welfare and cronyism, and you've mentioned this example of that sort of treatment in the auto industry. Are there others that like, what is on your top 10 list or top 3 list of things you'd like to change in the way in which companies are? Can you give us those?
It's a long list, Robert. Maybe one of these days over a beer we'll trade that. I will, at the risk of starting a conversation that we don't have time to finish. I will just say, I think the financial industry has a lot of cleaning up to do, and too big to fail is a very scary phrase. And when you look at the numbers since the last bailout, they haven't gotten any better.
Okay. All right, now let's turn to, let's go back to politics for just a minute here, because there is a section of the book where Charles recounts a time when he and his group got very heavily involved in politics, and then decided that really wasn't what they didn't feel good about that experience. Could you describe that part of the book? I found that fascinating.
Sure. Well, so I was there for the whole time.
So you right
in different roles. And so to me, it's an important learning experience, and we try to share this in the book. So Charles will tell you for 40, 50 years, he was engaged in these activities to try to improve society by applying these principles of a free and open society, mutual benefit, equal rights, and hadn't gotten engaged in politics. But we realized that, as we just talked about a minute ago, public policy plays an important role in helping people to succeed. And it's hard to change public policy if you don't have champions in political office to pass good policies that help people to improve their lives. So that was the motivation to get into direct political action back in the early 2010s, basically. And when we got engaged in that, we did it the way that everybody does. You pick a team and you basically have a partisan first strategy. You try to achieve partisan majorities, and then you hope that they're going to optimize public policy within that partisan majority. And we were pretty good at doing that. We got some things done. But after about 3 election cycles, we recognized this just isn't going to work. We'll keep getting things done at the margin, but we're never going to be able to tackle the really big challenges in public policy because, political parties don't exist to pass good policy. They exist, political parties exist to perpetuate the power of the political parties.
Yeah.
And so we said, look, there's got to be a better way. You got to stay engaged in politics, and we very much are still very engaged in the political process. But we can't do it as a partisan first strategy. We've got to lead with public policy and then support those people that will put out some real political capital to pass good policy to help people improve their lives, whether those people are Republicans or Democrats. And so that's what we're doing. And as we say in the book, it's working really well.
Yeah.
Been under some very difficult conditions, especially over the past few years. This strategy of policy first and then supporting people from either party who put their neck out basically to pass good policy, it's working.
Well, I just have to follow up a little bit on that. Was it that you got involved and you could make small change, but it wasn't satisfying enough? Or did you get involved and support people who then betrayed you or let you down or ended up, breaking your heart? I'm wondering, is it a little bit of both? Well,
I'd say it's trial and error. It's learning. And so the reason that we got engaged in politics was to help pass good policy. We were able to pass some good policy given the way we were engaged in politics, but it wasn't enough.
I got it.
And it wasn't that we were surprised that politicians said one thing and did another.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, we've got the incentives in politics were not aligned to really support people to be able to get hard things done. And so we believe that now going forward, we're in a position by helping to bring diverse coalitions to support those politicians that will stick their neck out, in some cases go against the parties to pass good policy that helps people improve their lives, we can change the incentives in politics to help make good policy good politics. And if you can get that right, wow, I mean, we can really address some of the big problems that have been intractable in federal policy and in state policy for decades.
So we've got a bunch of questions. They're really directed to your and the book's message concerning, building from the bottom up. And so one of them is just a very simple one. It's very direct, and it goes to another concept that is America is struggling with, and that is, how do local communities adjust to the impacts of globalization?
Yeah.
And what's the relationship there? Again, especially from your perspective, which is very anti-protectionist and pro-free trade. What's someone who wants to rebuild local communities? If we had Senator Hawley here, he'd say that local communities were destroyed by the Chinese in his state. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think we've heard that line of argument for a long time. And on the one hand, we have to be sympathetic to the fact that that not everybody wins to the same extent, right? When we see trade, when we see the disruptions that come with globalization, and so we have to say, look, the disruption that happens when you grow the pie, the gains from that are not distributed equally. And I think people who have advocated for free trade and advocated for the free market, and certainly I have done both and continue to, we've been less attentive to those real harms than we need to be. And I think that's opened the door for people who want to kind of offer the snake oil of protectionism, kind of offer the quick fix, which is really appealing on the surface, but as we talked about earlier, ultimately is counterproductive. So the first thing is we have to acknowledge that there are real challenges that come with this. And this isn't unique, right? I mean, we talk about in the book, we even reference the Luddites, right? The notion that there have always been people that want to stop change, even though change on net is beneficial, because we haven't identified a path to address the disruption that comes with change. But I think that we can't be seduced by those arguments. And so the point, what we discuss in the book is that complex problems like this are going to require comprehensive solutions. So we need to be investing in education. We need to make sure that there are educational options available for people who have been put out of work, by foreign competition. And it can't just be, hey, go get a 4-year degree. That's not practical, right? We have to disrupt the institution of education as well. We have a project that we're supporting called Skill Up, which I think is a great model and offers a lot of potential for the future. It's about 60 different organizations, everybody from Walmart to Stand Together, that are supporting this. And it's directly in response to people who have lost their jobs because of COVID, but it works well for others. It's artificial intelligence that through a quick quiz online helps you to identify your aptitudes, skills that you've got. And then it identifies quick educational modules that you can take online to help you build skills in a matter of a few weeks, several weeks maybe. But what's important is those are skills that then are matched with employers that have indicated they value those skills. So it's a technology-enabled job transitions program, but it's tapping a lot of good university, good digital education, that sort of thing. But it can't just be that. It's got to be, businesses have got to be all in on this. We need community support. Mutual assistance organizations have a role to play here. And we need to make sure that government policy isn't making it harder for those people to find their new path forward. Housing regulations, occupational licensure, all of these things that make job switching very difficult. We got to get rid of those things if we really truly want to take care of the people whose lives have been disrupted by trade or globalization, which ultimately is going to make society better off. And the notion that we can just sort of put up a wall or a protection and stop time, while it's, it can be appealing in a stump speech, history proves it's sort of the road to poverty for all of us. So
another version of that answer is that the answer to these issues is often to go to the community and build from the community level up and find solutions with social entrepreneurs and community leaders and rebuild communities that have been hard hit by economic dislocation coming from free trade. And my view of America is that there's stories like that all across America, towns that struggled during a period and now really have remade themselves through local efforts. And I guess what I want to know is, and one of the questioners wants to know is, what do you think is the key to getting a community and the people living in that community to see it that way? That they can't, or it won't ultimately be successful if they always turn to the federal government to solve their problem or a big government intervention, that they really have to do it. What do you think is the key that makes, I'm sure we could go across America and we could find some towns that have recovered and are doing well. This is a difficult time now during COVID, but at the end of 2019, and we have others that seem like they're struggling behind. What distinguishes their differences? What is the key to making one realize what you're teaching, which I think is correct, and another not get it? What do you think is the difference?
Well, I'm going to be flippant for a minute, and then I'll give you my thoughts. This is a tough question. I don't pretend to have all the answers. First thing is we have to stop lying to them. We have to stop pretending that this sort of protectionism can make their lives better. It doesn't.
Yeah.
The second thing is we have to believe in them.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds sort of flippant, trite. It's not. I mean, truly, what does protectionism ultimately communicate to a town like you're talking about?
Right.
It basically says, hey, we don't think you've got much to contribute in this new world, so we're going to try to freeze time.
Yeah.
And the consequences to that way of thinking flow down to the experiences that folks that you're describing have. Now, it's a lot harder than
so
that.
The key is to have them feel empowered, that they need to feel as if they can do it. If they're told they're not, or they can't, or they're too weak, or the forces of the world are too strong, overwhelming, or the only solution comes from Washington, then they won't do it. But once they realize, it's actually very similar to the message we taught in public assistance programs. The first step out of poverty is to recognize that you have a role in your future. Then we'll see if we can help you with various interventions, but it starts with the individual and builds from there.
I'll give you a quick example if I could. We talk about this in the book just to kind of put some meat on those bones, so it's not just arm waving. There's real stuff here to that answer. We tell the story of the Family Independence Initiative, right? This wonderful organization out of Oakland, California, that for the past couple of decades has been working with families in poverty to help them rise out of poverty. Their results are off the charts relative to sort of the baseline when it comes to poverty alleviation. You participate in this program for 2 years. On average, you raise your income 27%, which is significant. Mm-hmm. And what's more important is you stay out of poverty, you double your savings, you get on a path to success for your family. The way that Family Independence Initiative does it is not by coming in and giving them the magic formula, right? It's by believing in the families in poverty and saying, look, the solution to your poverty exists within you. You just need some help, like we all do, to express it and realize it. And so what does that help look like? It's modest financial support, on average about $3,500 over 2 years. It's not a lot of money, but it makes a difference. And then it's a social capital, creating connections. What they do is they create cohorts of families in poverty to create the kind of mutual support that we all need. And so it's not, those folks in those struggling towns need to pull themselves up from their bootstraps. That's not an accurate or satisfying answer. But it's also not, geez, we don't think you've got a role in the future, so let us just kind of make you comfortable, right? It's let us empower you by listening to what you've got to offer, and then finding ways to combine our resources so that everybody benefits.
Yeah, I think the pull yourself up by your bootstraps rhetoric about any people who talk about personal responsibility in public assistance or the role of the individual is a little unfair, because in the world we live in, there is an enormous amount of help available and support from community, from family, from government, from not-for-profits, from faith-based organizations. No one really believes that people are totally independent. Who among us is self-sufficient? Not you, not me. we're not self-sufficient. We depend on lots of people. And so I'm with you on all of that, but I sometimes feel badly for, I think that use of that, and I know you're not guilty of it, but even in today's political dialogue now, you can't find many people in Congress in the Republican Party who don't support a whole array of various ways of helping people who struggle, but they want to help them in the same time that they're encouraging them to work and see their own value. And I think that's very important.
I agree with you. I think the way that I look at it, the way that we talk about it in the book is that we need to help people to go through a personal transformation. So it's not enough to just alleviate their poverty.
Yeah.
It's to help them to discover how they can contribute. And by doing that, they will rise out of poverty, but then they'll be on a path to be successful and fulfilled and ultimately contributors, so that they help themselves by helping others.
So let's go. The last question is one that addresses something you mentioned earlier, which are the institutions of our communities, churches, civic society, civic associations, community groups. We haven't talked much about them so far, and I wondered the book's view of the strength of those institutions and the role of the social entrepreneur in rebuilding them. Do you feel that what's missing? Do you think those institutions are strong in America? And does believing in people, is that also a way to get those institutions rebuilt?
I think those institutions are absolutely essential to the success of our country to this point, and that if we're going to succeed going forward, we need to see a very robust civil society that involves all of those organizations that you mentioned and more. And one of the things that we find is that the social entrepreneurs that we support, they tend to be, pillars of the community in a sense, that they're leaders in organizations like those that you mentioned. Whether those are churches or whether those are, those are book clubs. I mean, those are the whole mix. Here again, I'll reference Tim Carney's work, which I found very persuasive on this. Mm-hmm. I think in many communities, and again, we can't sell short the progress and the prosperity in this country. It's alive and in many places very well, and we need to celebrate that. But in many communities that are doing very well, those institutions are very robust. But on the other side of the coin, in many communities that are struggling with all of the symptoms of decline, all of the challenges that are facing people, those communities are absent, or those institutions are absent. And so, yeah, that's a big part of what it means to live well together, I think, is through association and mutual assistance.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I got a couple last questions. The first one concerns the absence of negative energy in the book. So much of what at least I didn't see a lot of it. I mean, you talk about corporate welfare, and you talk about aspects of government policy that frustrate you. You talk about politicians that disappointed you, or public policy efforts disappointed you. But there isn't this sort of angry, rigged society rhetoric or that seems to motivate some portion of the voters in America on both sides. Am I right about that? I mean, do you think that the world is conspiring against individuals, and you're fighting a rearguard action, or what's your take on that? It's sort of similar to a similar question I asked in the beginning, but I admired that. This is a book about America, and it's about things we can do together. And it doesn't have a lot of, well, our problems are all someone else's fault and someone's out to get us. Am I right in that spirit, or do you have a sort of inner anger that I missed?
Well, as I say, we want to be very eyes wide open about the challenges that are facing our country. We don't want to gloss over that. There are real serious challenges. The question is, what's causing them and how can we overcome them? And I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's a failure of ideas. we're both come from organizations, Robert, that believe that ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
And they do. And so if we see the world through the ideas of top down, if we see people who are struggling as problems to be solved rather than the source of solutions, if we believe our best days are behind us and the best that we can do is kind of try to make people comfortable until the inevitable decline comes, well, then we're going to be pretty frustrated, right? And we're not going to see solutions.
Right.
If we believe in people, we recognize that progress comes when we empower everyone to find a way to contribute. Then there's nothing naive or sort of Panglossian about that, right? There is a call to action to change those institutions that are not doing that are not empowering people. And what we found is that the best way to beat a bad idea is with a better idea. So we don't try to dwell on the problem so much as we do offer solutions. And importantly, solutions that every single person can act on. That's the whole message of the book is it's not going to happen if somebody else does it. We can't wait. The cavalry's not coming. We've all got a role in helping to improve our country based on who we are and what we have to offer. And if we realize that, then it's a book about how America has always made progress by coming together, finding new and better ways to overcome the challenges, and ultimately realizing a future that's better than any of us imagined to begin with.
I'm glad you said that, and I would add also that you believe in humanity of all kinds. So it's generally a pro-immigrant book.
Absolutely.
You have a strong section about the change in our country concerning the gay community and how marriage rights were achieved. You celebrate that. There's no the other in your book. There's no those people. Those people are the same people you believe in, of all kinds. Am I right about that's very much a part of Charles and yours worldview?
Absolutely. I mean, believe in people means all people, no matter who you are, where you came from, how much money you make, where your parents were born, what language you speak. All people have something to contribute. And I think if you read history and you understand the history of progress in our country, the Declaration of Independence is a noble document. It is our North Star, and it expresses a vision of a country that prospers when all people have the rights and the opportunities. Now as a country, we know that we've never lived up to that, but when we've moved closer to that North Star, when we've extended the opportunity of America to more and more people, not only have those people realized improvements in their lives, but we've all benefited. So it's a vision of radical inclusion, guided by the principles in the Declaration of Independence, with a roadmap for how we can all play a role in helping us to get there.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I've enjoyed this immensely. I enjoyed the book. The book is going well. Is it fun to write a book with Charles and travel the country and tell everybody your message?
Well, we're not doing a whole lot of travel in the country, but
that's right.
It's been an experience of a lifetime, and I'm grateful that Charles gave me the opportunity to do it, and grateful to you, Robert, that you've given us the chance to share the lessons with more people.
Well, we're happy to do that, and the AI community is broad and getting bigger and thoughtful, and they're influencers. And so those who've watched, thank you for being with us, and spread the word, and we'll put this on our website, and others will see it there as well. So Brian, thanks for being with us, and thanks to all of you who've joined us this afternoon.
Thank you, Robert, and thanks to everything that you do at AEI. Really appreciate it.